Are we live? Are you around? I have it on first. Okay, I didn't know you were live. Turn it back up? Yeah, I'm going to go.
the way, please. You're instructed.
Ariel Castro, the man who held Amanda Berry, Gina DeJesus, and Michelle Knight captive for a decade, is about to be sentenced. Good morning again, everyone. Castro accepted a plea deal on 937 charges last week, and as long as the judge accepts, will be sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. We've also learned that Michelle Knight will address the court today, and statements will be read on behalf of Amanda Berry and Gina DeJesus. And we want to warn you, some of the evidence presented may indeed be graphic. So let's go live right now to the Justice Center in downtown Cleveland, the hearing on Ariel Castro and what happens to his life now.
All rise. Court is in session. Please be seated.
All right, we're here this morning for sentencing in case 575-419, State of Ohio versus Ariel Castro. Mr. Castro, have you had a chance to speak with your attorney since last Friday when you were in court?
Yes, I have, Your Honor.
And have they discussed with you your rights at the sentencing and the procedures to be followed?
Yes, I have.
So you do understand that you have a right to speak if you wish?
Yes, I have.
And have your attorneys done all that you've asked them to do?
Yes.
Okay. Now, along with your sentencing, there's a requirement that I provide a sex offender notification advisements. And I have two forms that were returned. Because of the time span of these offenses, there are two periods of reporting requirements, two sets. One would be under Megan's law and one would be under Adam Walsh law. So there are two separate forms that have been completed. So we had a chance to discuss each of these forms and requirements with your attorneys.
Yes, I have, and I signed it.
And showing you the forms, are these your signatures in blue ink on both of the forms?
Can I see that from you?
Mr. Schleich, if you want to just confirm that with him.
Just had an opportunity to review the two forms, Your Honor. Thank you.
Mr. Castro, are these the two forms that you read and discussed with your attorneys?
Yes.
And are these your signatures in blue ink?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any questions for me about the forms or the requirements?
No. No.
You understand that if you have if you violate the reporting requirements, you would be charged with a different and new felony. You understand that?
Say it again.
If you did not comply with the reporting requirements, you would then be charged with a new felony. Are you aware of that?
What exactly mean? I'm not exactly sure what it is.
These are reporting requirements for an individual who is in the community, so that they can be placed on the database, their neighbors can be notified, those types of things. To understand that if you, for any reason, would ever be not in prison, you'd be bound by these requirements, and if you violated them by not reporting or other matters, you could then be charged and prosecuted for a new felony. Is that clear? And Mr. Schleich and Ms. Weintraub, have you each had a chance to discuss these forms and the reporting requirements with your client?
We have, Your Honor. They were actually read to Mr. Castro. Thank you.
Ms. Weintraub, is that correct?
That is correct.
And gentlemen, was it your feeling that he not only understood these forms, but that he was intelligently and knowingly signing them? Is that correct?
We are of that opinion, Your Honor. Thank you. Yes, Your Honor.
Then, Mr. Pastor, do you have any questions about these reporting requirements on these forms?
No.
I'm going to sign the forms then certifying that Mr. Castro has been informed of his duties to register as a sex offender, that he understands them. He also understands that failure to comply with them will result in prosecution for a felony. Mr. Castro, you'll receive a copy of each of these forms, and they will go with you to the institution. Is that clear?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
And the general import of the forms is that you would be required, by operation of Megan's Law, which was in effect until December 31st, 2007, you would be required to report every 90 days for your lifetime to the Sheriff's Department. And then there would be other reporting requirements if you moved or other circumstances. Under the Adam Walsh Act that was in effect after January 1st, 2008, it again requires you as a Tier 3 offender under the new law to verify your address every 90 days with the Sheriff's Department, and then there are other requirements if you move, if you go on vacation, if you change your internet identifier, car registration, all those things. You understand those?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
And under Megan's Law, that was in effect until the end of 2007. During that time period, the court would ordinarily be required to have a sex offender classification hearing, but because of the nature of your offenses, that you pled guilty to rape and there was a sexually violent predator specification, by operation of law, by pleading guilty, you became denominated a sexual predator. So that's why we didn't have the hearings that we used to have prior to Adam Walsh Act. You understand?
Yes, I do understand.
Okay. And Mr. Weintraub, Mr. Schlacken, is that an accurate statement of the law as you know it?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, we're going forward then with the sentencing aspect, since Mr. Castro has been advised of the sex offender reporting requirements. Mr. Castro, you will recall last week when you were here, you entered a plea. You had previously signed a plea agreement. Do you have a copy before you? I provided you a copy this morning. Do you see it?
One moment.
So you have the plea agreement that you signed, is that correct?
Yes, I do.
And you also have a copy of the journal entry that I signed and filed with the court confirming your plea and then posting a finding of guilt on all the numerous counts that you pled on. Do you see that?
Yes, I have it, Your Honor.
Okay. And I also provided you today a copy of the 977 count indictment. If you want to refer to it at any point, it's available on the table for you. Okay?
Yes.
So, Mr. Castro, as far as the sentencing hearing, your attorneys waived a pre-sentence investigation and the court did not order one. But as part of the sentencing hearing, I have received and reviewed the state's pre-sentence investigation report and sentencing memorandum. We also have provided it with a number of exhibits that I've considered. Your attorneys are going to speak on your behalf. You have the opportunity to speak if you wish, or to present any information in mitigation of punishment. That's your right. After that, the prosecuting attorney will be afforded an opportunity to speak. The victims will be provided an opportunity to speak or have their representatives present information to the court. After that, I'll announce your sentence and I'll go through the various statutory findings and give reasons in support of the sentence that is imposed. Is all that clear?
Yes, it is, Your Honor.
And Mr. Schlagen, Mr. Weintraub, had you explained this previously?
Yes, Your Honor.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. All right, Mr. Schlagen, Mr. Weintraub, on behalf of your client.
Judge, can I just make a quick objection before we start?
Yes.
In anticipation of what's going to happen today. We've obviously been provided quite kindly by the government with a binder index, which is an outline of what they intend to introduce today. As you know, Your Honor, there's only, and I'll be very brief, thank you, Judge, for your patience. There's only 3 applicable sections that I'd like to address. I'd like you to take a look at Ohio Revised Code 2930.02, which is the representative of a victim, which of course allows the victims not to come in court themselves, but they can designate a representative. Some of the victims are going to do. The second one is 2930.13, which provides for a victim impact statement when there is a pre-sentence investigation report, which of course Mr. Castro has waived. Finally, Your Honor, the only other applicable sentencing statute for the victim's appearance at these hearings is 2930.14, which allows the court to permit the victim of the crime to make a statement, or the designee. There is nothing in the law that provides the state's ability now to come in and basically retry this case, which didn't go to trial, for the exact purpose of avoiding a public spectacle of everything that's going to happen. And we absolutely, Your Honor, object to any introduction by the state of anything except the victim or the victim's designee to come in and say the impact that it's had on them. Introducing doctor reports or photographs or a model of the house has absolutely nothing to do with what's happened, and I'm going to defer to Mr. Weintraub today, who's going to have a much more detailed analysis and statement, but we do object for the record, Your Honor, and ask you not to allow it and certainly not to consider it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weintraub.
Thank you, Your Honor. On July 26, 2013, Mr. Castro entered a guilty plea to over 900 counts in an amended indictment, and in that plea agreement, he agreed to do a life sentence without parole and an additional minimum of 1,000 years to life. More importantly, it's known by everyone that he waived his appellate rights to challenge any factual aspects of this case, including the sentence. I think that all of us at both tables in this courtroom understand that this is a highly unusual and unique case for all of the attorneys. That's why the media descended on Cleveland. This case has facts that are incomprehensible and of such nature that the parties agreed not to disclose details provided by the women unless there was a trial. The high-profile nature of this case drove our sensitivity to protect the dignity and privacy interests of these three women. It is uncontroverted this is a unique case, and it's a story about her incredible survival, as well as a man with significant undiagnosed mental illness. I want to be clear for the record, though, that his mental illness does not affect his competency to understand these proceedings, and it did not meet the legal definition of insanity. But someone who engages in the conduct that he did for 10 years and lives a double life to prevent exposure of his dark side obviously suffers from significant mental illness. Mr. Castro does accept full responsibility for his conduct and understands that despite his mental illness, as well as any sort of sexual or physical abuse that he suffered as a child, that those factors will never justify his crimes. Trying to perhaps forensically understand the causes of his conduct may have some societal value, but it doesn't legitimize his conduct, and that's not what we want to impress upon the court. During the course of the last 90 days, when we were privy to the discovery of this case, we learned that Amanda, Michelle, and Gina maintained incredible hope, faith, and bravery throughout their 10 years of ordeal with very, very dark days inside a world that they did not choose. Since they have been free, the courage and the strength that they have exhibited is remarkable. It's also truly remarkable and inspiring that this great community has demonstrated such genuine empathy and has provided a fund to assist in any way possible. And Mr. Castro recognizes that and is encouraged, despite his mental illness, which again is not offered as an excuse or mitigation in any sense, but he does recognize the fact that they deserve this compensation for what they had to endure. But for the most part, though, we also recognize that the public has really identified with the concept of maintaining the privacy of the victims in this case, which would include Jocelyn, and so crucial that they can continue to reclaim their lives. And so with that in mind, we're aware that the prosecutor's office is going to offer testimony from maybe one of the victims or all of the victims or the representatives of the victims may appear. And as Mr. Schlack had said, that is appropriate for our consideration, that is appropriate at this sentence, and it is relevant. But again, against this backdrop, we too are continuing to be concerned about the invasion of the privacy interests of the victims unless they choose for the world to know what happened to them on a personal level inside that home. We now know, based on the materials that were provided to us, that graphic photographs, we see the model house of 2207 Seymour, but there's going to be testimony about Stockholm Syndrome and specific facts about the horrific events that occurred inside that house, including perhaps chains and other items that may have been utilized during vicious sexual assaults. And this is going to be shown ultimately to the world. His acceptance of responsibility and his decision to enter into a plea was swift, and it was within 90 days of his arrest. It's very uncommon to see that, particularly in a case like this. The decision was made in his best interest, the best interest of the women and Jocelyn, and for the community. It has always been our collective goal to never re-victimize these women, even at the sentencing hearing. That's why he chose never to appeal the facts in this case or the sentence and accepted life without parole in addition to a minimum of 1,000 years of life imprisonment. This is an acknowledgement that he actually committed the worst form of the offenses. Serious consideration was devoted to the terms of the plea agreement and whether the death penalty was applicable to some of these allegations, and a joint decision was made to reach a result that reflects accountability for the heinous conduct and massive punishment. We hope that the intention of the plea agreement was to preserve the privacy of the victims and to avoid exposing the cruelty that they suffered to the world unless they chose to publicly release the details of the crime. So essentially what we believe here today is going to be inappropriate to share in the world and venture into the specific horrific facts of what happened inside the house for 100 years. Those graphic facts were best suited for a trial, which we agreed to avoid to protect the integrity of their privacy. Mr. Castro pled guilty to over 900 counts and does not dispute any of the charges or the specific dates of the crimes as reflected in the indictment. The upcoming presentation that's going to be captured by the media and played all over the world will forever memorialize the fact of the brutality that occurred. I understand that there's a potential argument for a deterrent effect, but doesn't this enhance the possibility that someone actually gets an idea that this is maybe a good idea to engage in this sort of similar conduct? That's what we wanted to avoid, was offering up the details of salacious facts. This is precisely why we entered into a plea. This is why Mr. Castro has acknowledged that the agreed sentence of life without parole and 1,000 years is an appropriate punishment. We wanted to avoid this. However, it's the prosecutor's decision to have to show the world these facts. Thank you.
Mr. Schlagen, anything that you would like to place before the court at this time?
Nothing. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Castro, is there anything that you would like to say with respect to the sentencing or mitigation of penalty?
I would like to apologize to the victims. Do I do that now?
Yes, you may do that now.
Do I do that at the end of the day?
You can do it then too. This is one of your opportunities to speak.
I'll do it at the end of the day.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Weintraub, Mr. Schlagen, I am mindful of your statements in Ohio law with respect to sentencing. Frankly, considering the scope and the nature of the charges and the victims involved, I don't know that this could have been any more dignified. I think it has been, through the cooperation of counsel as well as Mr. Castro's plea, it's been a very orderly proceeding to date, and I don't anticipate that the remainder of the sentencing hearing will be any different. The parties have met and talked with the court, and I have advised them of the scope and what will be permitted. And particularly here, I think the state's concern is that in light of the maximum and consecutive nature of the sentence, anything after count one, that there would be an adequate record so that any reviewing court or anybody would know the foundation why such a sentence might be appropriate, why it is not symbolic, but actually justified. All right, so I understand your concerns. As the trial judge, as the person doing the sentencing, I'm not going to be considering or improperly influenced by something that might otherwise be considered prejudicial before a jury or another group. I've heard many graphic details on many cases in this courtroom and as a prosecutor, so I will only be considering that which is necessary under the law to make the proper sentence, fashion a proper sentence here. Okay?
Thank you, Judge. Judge, we take no exception. If I could just have one comment. There has never been an allegation that there's not a factual basis to the plea. It wasn't a no contest. It was a plea of guilty. So I would just ask to consider that, Your Honor, and perhaps revisit our objection. Thank you.
Thank you. And with respect to some of the concerns they have about details coming out that I guess the fear is that somehow the state is exploiting the three women who were kidnapped here. Mr. Thomas, you, Mr. McGinney, Ms. Ryan, and the rest of your team, you have all consulted with the victims, and they, I believe, are intending to speak or have their representatives speak as well, correct?
That is correct, Your Honor.
Okay. So I'm assuming that what you're doing is consistent with their wishes and what they're anticipated to say?
Yes, and with our statutory duties. And Your Honor, I would note for the record that the court reserved the right to review and accept or reject the plea contract, the plea agreement between the parties. So it is not a done deal at this point. Mr. Castro's now a admitted murderer, rapist, serial kidnapper, and it's only appropriate that we put before this community, this state, this country, and the world what he did for over 10 years. And we're going to be directing the court, as I know you are fully aware, of the felony sentencing statutes in the state of Ohio that are applicable. Revised Code Section 2911, the purposes of felony sentencing, which I won't recite. I know you do it every day ad nauseum. And 2912, the seriousness of crime and recidivism factors. We will be offering statements from investigators, photographs, exhibits, and other results of this investigation for the purpose of supporting the plea contract that's before the court, in the anticipation that at the end of the presentment, you will fully agree that this situation, this series of crimes, these series of horrendous offenses by Mr. Castro justify the recommended sentence agreed to by the parties.
That in sentencing hearings that we have, of course, victims are always entitled to speak, but frequently we receive other information, not strictly from a victim. Medical records, we have block watch people that testify, or not testify, but come in and give information. And there will not be testimony today, there will be information presented to the court. The sentencing hearing is not bound by the rules of evidence. It's a little bit wider to give information, and the court will consider the relevant information in determining, in fact, whether I will or not accept the sentencing recommendation of the parties. So it would not be unique to have someone other than a victim speak or offer information to the court, so the court can reach an appropriate sentence. And of course, I'm presumed only to consider relevant, permissible information and fashion the sentence. Mr. Thomas, on behalf of the state.
Thank you, Your Honor. At this time, Ms. Lennick will present a statement by Officer Barbara Johnson of the Cleveland Police Department.
Thank you. Morning, officer.
Thank you.
This officer, police officer.
Officer, good morning.
Good morning.
Can you please just introduce
First
yourself?
officers on the scene on Seymour Avenue when the three women were discovered.
There's 1779.
And which department do you work for,
I work
please?
for Cleveland Police Department, 2nd District.
And how long?
Going on 17 years.
Officer, you were one of the first responders
Yes,
when
I was.
during the rescue of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Virginia DeJesus.
Yes, I was.
Can you please lay out for the court receiving that call, your arrival on scene, and then the conditions that you observed when you went into the house at 2207 Seymour?
I heard the call come over for 2207 Seymour that Amanda Berry had escaped from that residence. I went to assist the responding officers. Upon my arrival, I see Officer Spada and Officer Tracy running across the street from 2210 to 2207. I pulled up and I immediately followed them over to the house. I'm not sure what transpired before my arrival, but as we approached 2207, Officer Spada advised me that Amanda Berry was across the street and she escaped from this house, and said that there are others in the house. Unsure if there was a suspect in the house, so we obviously go in very cautiously. We eventually gain entry after several attempts by several different officers. And the first couple officers went in first floor. Officer Spada and I went upstairs. I had to climb over a little bit of furniture to get up the steps. I remember it was very dark because I didn't take my flashlight with me because it was a bright sunny day. I didn't think I'd need my flashlight in this house. But fortunately, I had a flashlight on my firearm. So as we were going up the steps, I remember turning the light on for a couple seconds just to see where we were going. As we got to the top of the steps, there's a big heavy curtain, and I remember Officer Spada pushed it over to the side. And as we were approaching it, he hollered out several times, "Cleveland Police, Cleveland Police." As he went up the final step, I held the curtain back and I took a quick look over to the right because he went to the left. And I saw a room with kids' toys. I didn't see anybody inside. So I then, he hollered out, "Cleveland Police" again, and then you hear some pitter-patter steps, someone running, but stopped. And when we shined the flashlight, I remember I kind of shined the flashlight so whoever it was could see that we were the police. We later found out it was Michelle Knight as she literally launched herself in Officer Spada's arms. Legs, arms, just choking him, and she just kept repeating, "You saved us, you saved us." At that point, I told her, "It's okay, honey, you're safe." She then came over to me and jumped into my arms as I'm trying to reholster my weapon. Her legs were wrapped around me, so it was kind of hard to get my weapon back in my holster. But he said, "Is anybody else here?" And it seemed like an eternity, but all of a sudden you see another face peek around the corner of the doorway. And it was later, Officer Spada asked her, "So what's your name?" And she said, "Georgina DeJesus." But she wouldn't come out of the room. She was very reluctant to come out of the room. He said, "Honey, it's okay. We're here to help you." And that's when everybody was relieved, happy that we were there to rescue them, basically.
What were the conditions like on the floor of the house where you were when you found Michelle Knight and Virginia DeJesus?
Like I said, it was dark up in that hallway because I did use my flashlight on my weapon to look around. But once Michelle was in my arms, I reholstered. So the only other light I saw was in the next bedroom, which ended up being Amanda's bedroom. I don't know if the lights were on in the girls, Michelle and Gina's room. I'm not sure if they were on at the time because there was so much activity at that point.
How well were you able to see the two girls, Michelle Knight and Virginia DeJesus?
Not until we went into the bedroom. I did remember looking at Gina, and it took me a second to really realize it was her because she was a lot thinner and pale. compared to the pictures you've seen for the last 10 years of her, where she was a little bit heavier, long hair, she had real short hair, and she was real thin and pale. But you could see the resemblance. You knew it was her. But it took it just, that extra second to get a look. Michelle was so tiny, I thought she was a little girl until I put her down and got a look at her and realized she was a grown woman. And it took us a few minutes to figure out that, yes, she was also in the system as a missing person. She also was very petite, very little, pale. She was very, very scared. She had a very difficult time breathing when she was in my arms. I remember I called for an ambulance right away because she was having a very hard time breathing. So other than...
Call for an ambulance?
We did. I called right away for an ambulance.
Did you stay with the two girls and the two women when the ambulance arrived?
Yes, I stayed with them for the rest of the day. From going out to the ambulance. We were probably on scene in the ambulance, I want to say maybe about 20 minutes before we went to the hospital, and I stayed with them at the hospital for a good part of the evening.
Were you able to get a better look at them outside once they were in the ambulance?
Yes, oh yes.
And can you tell us, please, what were your observations of the women then once they were in the ambulance?
They were all three of them were very, like I said, very pale, still kind of reluctant, not really sure what was happening because they didn't know what we were going to do with them. Thin, pale, scared. They were just a lot of talking. They were very, just telling all kinds of things that happened to them.
And how many individuals are we talking about now who are in the ambulance?
We are now talking about Amanda, Gina, Michelle, Amanda's daughter, and another officer and I, Officer Harrigan and I, and then a couple other people would come in and out, letting us know, trying to get details of the vehicle that, the suspect's supposed to be in, what his name is, his description, because they were broadcasting that so they could get that information out to try and detain him.
What do you recall from when the women were inside the ambulance and speaking, some of the detail they were giving you about what happened to them?
Well, they were just shouting out a lot of things. And as they were talking in my head, I didn't ask a lot of questions, I just let them talk. I do remember at one point looking at Amanda and asking her, well, how about when you had your daughter? Didn't you go to the hospital? And she said, oh no, she said, I had my daughter here at the house. And she said, Michelle delivered her for me. And I was just dumbfounded. I couldn't believe that. And they said, yeah, we put a big plastic pool underneath her to help with the cleanup so it wouldn't make such a mess. I remember Michelle saying, yeah, he told me if that baby died, he was going to kill me.
Did you learn of any other pregnancies that occurred in the house?
I did ask if anybody else had ever been pregnant, and Michelle said, oh, I was. And she said, I was several times, and every time he found out I was pregnant, he'd starve me, and he'd punch me in the stomach, and Gina at that point was saying, yeah, he'd starve her for at least 2 weeks, and he might give her Pepsi once in a while, and then he'd hit her, just till she lost the baby. So they kind of corroborated back and forth about that.
Did you stay with the women when the ambulance transported them to the hospital?
Yes, I went with them all the way to the hospital, and I stayed with them every time they had to go to the restroom. I'd walk with, so they weren't alone. They wanted security with them at all times.
And did you see any change in their demeanor?
A little bit. I noticed Gina was very, let's say, reserved. I don't know if she was just confused by the whole thing, but a lot of the nurses and the staff at the hospital would come up and just give her a big hug and say, we've been praying for you, honey, and she just kind of stood there with her arms at her side looking around. And then when they left the room, she looked at me and she said, who's that? And I said, honey, you're going to get a lot of that the next few weeks. So she was just not sure of what was going on. Michelle was still very frightened, very, like she just kind of held herself close. And Amanda, she had her daughter, so she seemed to be a little more well-rounded as far as trying to protect her daughter, making it seem like everything was okay. You know in her that she wasn't, but she just kind of had that, trying to make it look like everything was okay for her daughter. That was all she thought about.
Thank you so much, Officer.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, the state would next present Gerald Maloney, again by Ms. Lennon.
Thank you. Morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Judge.
Ms. Liddy?
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, could you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hi, my name is Dr. Gerald Maloney, Maloney. I'm an attending physician in the Emergency Department at Metro Health Medical Center.
Dr. Maloney, you've had an opportunity in the emergency room at Metro to deal with Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, Georgina DeJesus, and another minor child.
That's correct. I was the emergency physician on duty that night.
Can you please detail for the ladies and gentlemen of the court, what were your general assessment and treatment of the patients when they came into Metro?
Okay. The patients arrived by EMS. We evaluated them immediately upon arrival. All three of them appeared emotionally distraught. We're glad that they were free. All three of them appeared very emotionally distraught. All three of them did relate to us that they had been sexually assaulted. All three of them related to us that they had been held prisoner in this house for several years against their will. Ms. Knight in particular related that she had been held prisoner, related that she had been pregnant and had been subject to both deprivation of food and physical assault to try and induce a miscarriage. All three of them related to various stories of physical assault as well. Ms. Knight also had several bruises and appeared somewhat emaciated, so she had evidence of malnutrition as well as of physical abuse. All three girls, again, by their mental status as well, appeared very distraught. And Michelle in particular was very upset and actually preferred not to have a male physicians or nurses in the rooms after an initial evaluation. She had the rest of her care done by female nurses and a female resident physician.
Did the hospital or medical staff do any sort of specific examination for sexual assault?
Yes, they had forensic exams done by sexual assault nurse examiner.
And when you say they, are you referring to all four patients?
All three patients, the minor child did not.
What would you say you observed, if anything, about their general demeanor? I know you explained quite well for us about Michelle Knight. What about the other two?
The other two were also distraught. Again, there was a mix of distraught and also elation that they were free now after years of captivity. But they were distraught, they were tearful, and they were very much emotionally fragile at the time they arrived.
And you were given information about a period of prolonged captivity. Was there any sort of documentation that you made of them, in addition to their gaunt appearance, that would lead to that they had been captive for such a period of time?
But in addition to the gaunt appearance, and also again specifically Ms. Knight had several bruises which indicated that she had undergone physical abuse as well. All three of them looked fairly gaunt. All three of them related that they had been allowed minimal time outside the house at all. All three were very pale. as well as said there is corroborating physical evidence to support their reported period of captivity.
And do you recall the date after that you saw these patients?
It was May 6th of 2013.
Without getting into specific detail, were there narratives or more documentation given to you with regards to what sort of sexual assault the women underwent?
Yes, they related information regarding the sexual assaults to us and also to the sexual assault nurse examiner.
And in a very general description of what nature were those assaults?
Forcible rape.
And are you able to get any more specific as far as what type?
All three of them were raped. All three of them were raped vaginally, was what they reported. Multiple repeated times. Again, it was all against their will under threat of physical harm, what they related.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the state would next present Detective Andrew Karasimchuk of the Cleveland Police Department Sex Crimes Unit. He will be presented by Assistant Prosecutor Max Mark.
Thank you. Morning, Detective.
Sir.
Good morning, Detective.
Good morning.
Will you please identify yourself for the court?
Yeah, Detective Andrew Harasimchuk, H-A-R-A-S-I-M-C-H-U-K, badge number 481. I work for the City of Cleveland Division of Police Sex Crimes Child Abuse Unit.
You are a detective?
That's correct.
Were you working in that capacity on May 6th of 2013?
Yes, I was.
And in fact, did you later become the lead Cleveland Police Department investigator of this case?
Yes, I did.
All right. Can you tell us how you became involved in this case?
Yes. On May 6th of 2013, I was in the office of the Sex Crimes Child Abuse Unit when I received a phone call from Sergeant Coleman, who requested assistance from Sex Crimes Child Abuse Unit detectives at Metro Health Medical Center in the location of 2207 Seymour Avenue in connection with the recovery of Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus.
What did you do when you got that call?
Myself and Detective Carl Lessman responded to 2207 Seymour Avenue. Once there, we spoke with FBI Special Agent Andrew Burke and Cleveland Police Department Deputy Chief Tamba. Deputy Chief Chamba directed myself and Detective Lessman to head over to Metro Hospital to interview the victims.
Did you go to Metro?
Yes, we did.
And what did you do when you got there?
Once at Metro Health Hospital, it was myself, Detective Laura Parker, and Detective Cynthia Adkins. We then conducted the initial interviews of the victims.
And which victims are you speaking of at this point?
Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus.
What were those victim interviews like?
They were very brief. It was a very chaotic setting at the time in the hospital.
What was chaotic about it?
There's multiple people present in the room, and hospital staff and other personnel coming in and out of the room at the time.
This is just hours after their escape?
That's correct.
Did you interview Michelle Knight?
Yes, I did.
And what did you learn from your interviews with Michelle Knight?
During the initial interview with Michelle Knight, who was 21 years old at the time she was taken, stated that on August 22nd of 2002, she was walking in an attempt to find this social worker that is in charge of her son, because she wanted to speak with him. She was lost and she was in a store, and she was starting to ask people for directions, at which time Ariel Castro approached her and said he knew where she was looking for and offered to help her. Michelle Knight knew Ariel Castro because she's friends with his daughter, Emily Castro, so she accepted the ride.
Did Michelle relate to what took place after she got in Ariel Castro's car?
Yes. They began driving and they arrived at Ariel Castro's home. He asked her if she wanted to come inside to get a puppy for her son. So she agreed to go in to pick out a puppy for her son. Once inside the home, she did not see a puppy. She did see a dog, but there were no puppies. At this time, She is physically restrained by Ariel Castro with an extension cord. She's left that way for several hours. When Ariel Castro returns, he takes her down to the basement where she's physically restrained with a chain. Plastic ties are put on her wrists, and a motorcycle helmet is placed on her head. This time she is sexually assaulted. Michelle Knight was left alone, physically restrained in the dark basement overnight. During this interview, Michelle Knight described a pattern of being repeatedly sexually, physically, and emotionally abused by Ariel Castro during her entire time of captivity.
So during this interview, you're learning about the initial abduction as well as the crimes that were committed against her throughout her captivity?
That's correct.
And she was able to identify Ariel Castro as the perpetrator of those crimes?
That's correct.
What else did she tell you?
During a subsequent, she stated that on the night they were rescued on May 6, 2013, when the patrol officers entered the house, she heard loud noises, and she began to panic. She said that she heard someone yelling, "Police, police, police," and the next thing she knew, she had been rescued by the police.
All right, did you have an opportunity to interview her subsequent to that initial interview that you conducted on May 6th?
Yes, I did.
What did you learn from any subsequent interview of Ms. Knight?
During subsequent interviews, Michelle Knight relayed that she had been pregnant on several occasions in the house, and she knew this because she felt the same way that she was when she was pregnant with her son. She also relayed that Ariel Castro terminated her pregnancies. This was done by starving her, feeding her rotten food, kicking and punching her in the stomach, jumping up and down on her in the stomach, and forcing her to perform physical exercises.
And the result of that torture?
That resulted in the termination of her pregnancies.
Did she also relate to you that he kicked her downstairs in an effort to terminate those pregnancies?
Yes, she did.
Now, did you have occasion to interview Amanda Berry on May 6th?
Yes, I did.
And what were you able to learn through that interview?
During the initial interview with Amanda Berry, who was 16 years old at the time she was taken by Ariel Castro, stated that on April 21st of 2003, she had just gotten off work at Burger King and was walking home when a van drove by her, which had a female in it that she thought she knew, so she smiled. She continued walking. A short time later, that same van approached her, and the male in the van asked her if she wanted a ride. She accepted it because she thought she knew the female in the van. As she got in the van, she realized that this female was no longer in there. She'd just gotten off of work at Burger King, so she was wearing her Burger King uniform. Ariel Castro asked her if she knew his son, who had worked at Burger King, and she said that she did. He then went on to ask if Amanda Berry knew his daughter Angie, and she did know his daughter Angie Castro. So they began driving, and Ariel Castro asked her if he wanted to go see Angie, who was at his home. So they went to Ariel Castro's home. But once they got there, he told her to come on inside the house so she could talk to Angie.
Was she there when Ms. Berry got inside the home?
Ariel Castro told her that she was in the home taking a bath. So he began showing Amanda Berry around the house. As they went upstairs, there was a closed door, and she was able to look through a hole where the doorknob used to be, and the door and saw a female who she later learned to be Michelle Knight, was in that room. At that time, Ariel Castro told her that that was his roommate. Once they were upstairs in the upstairs bedroom, Amanda Berry told Ariel Castro to please take her home, or she would call the police. At this time, she attempted to run out of the room, but it was dark in the room, and she became disoriented and ran into a closet. It was at this time that Ariel Castro first sexually assaulted her. He then used duct tape to tie her wrists, her legs, put duct tape on her mouth, and a motorcycle helmet on her head. He then carried her down in the basement, where he physically restrained her with a chain, where he left her overnight alone in the dark basement.
What was she chained to?
She was chained to the center pole of the basement, the center support pole. During this interview, Amanda also said that she had given birth to her daughter there, and that birth was assisted by Michelle Knight. She said that during her pregnancy, she received no pre or postnatal medical care or any medical care whatsoever.
Did she describe the treatment that she received, this type of assault that she received during her period of captivity?
She did.
What did she tell you?
She also described a repeated pattern of being sexually, physically, and emotionally assaulted by Ariel Castro during her entire time of captivity.
Did she tell you about her escape?
She did.
What did she tell you?
She stated that on the day she escaped, she was terrified. She was attempting to open the door. She was afraid that Ariel Castro would return. She was able to open the main door to the home, and then the storm door, the screen door, was locked and she couldn't open it. She began banging on the glass and calling for help. At this time, a man and a woman from across the street came into Ariel Castro's yard, and while they're in the yard, a man from next door also came over and was up on the porch and began telling Amanda to kick out the bottom panel of the door. After several kicks to the door panel, she was able to get the door panel open, and then she crawled out through the door panel with her daughter.
Very good. Now, did you have an opportunity to interview Georgina De Jesus on May 6, 2013?
Yes.
What did you learn from that interview?
During the initial interview with Georgina De Jesus, who was 14 years old at the time she was taken, stated that on April 2nd, 2004, she was walking home from school with her friend, Rosie, or Ariel Castro.
And who is that?
That is Ariel Castro's daughter.
What happened while they were walking home?
They wanted to see if Rosie was able to go over to Gina De Jesus' house, so they stopped at a payphone to make a phone call. They called Rosie's mother and asked if she would be able to come over to Gina's house. She was not allowed to, so the two girls walked home in their separate directions.
What happened to her next?
As she was walking home, she was approached by Ariel Castro, and he asked her if he could help her locate his daughter. And she assumed that he was referring to Rosie, who she had just left, so she said that yes, he could help her. So she got in the van, and they started driving. They turned somewhere where she didn't think they should turn. At this point, Ariel Castro tells her that he has to go home to get some money. So they go to his house. Once at his house, he asked Georgina De Jesus if she could come into the house and help him carry out a speaker and put it in the car. So she agrees to do that.
What happened when she went into the house?
Once she was inside the house, she became uncomfortable and she wanted to leave. Ariel Castro told her that she had to exit the home from a different door that she came in, so they went out a different door and she wound up in the basement. At this time, Ariel Castro physically restrained her with a chain that was attached to the center support pole of the basement, put plastic ties on her wrists. It was at this time that Gina De Jesus was first sexually assaulted. During this interview, Georgina De Jesus described a repeated pattern of being sexually, physically, and emotionally assaulted by Ariel Castro during the entire time she was held captive.
Did she tell you about the escape on May 6th?
She did. She said on May 6, 2013, when they escaped, she heard Jocelyn Berry running up and down the stairs, saying, Daddy left, went to Grandma's house. She states that she was just going to lay still and not do anything because she was afraid it could be a trap and that Ariel Castro could be outside waiting for them.
So now you've wrapped up your interviews at Metro. You've got a snapshot of the incredible story of survival, right?
Yes.
And how do you continue your investigation? What do you do?
I interviewed Ariel Castro. I visited the crime scene. I read dozens of reports that were completed by various law enforcement agencies. I examined hundreds of photographs. I reviewed hundreds of pieces of physical evidence that were taken from the house. I conducted follow-up interviews with the victims. I reviewed written materials kept by the victims during their years of captivity. I consulted with the prosecutor's office.
And what did your investigation reveal? All of those things that you did, what did those techniques reveal?
During the course of this investigation, and after several interviews with the victim, after reviewing all that evidence, it was determined that Ariel Castro and Ariel Castro alone was the only person involved in this incident. Throughout their captivity, all the victims had been physically restrained in some type of fashion throughout their entire time they were held by Ariel Castro. They all stated that they were moved around the house and physically restrained. They were deprived of food, bathing, and bathroom facilities.
How were they restrained?
They were all physically restrained by a chain or being locked in a room.
What else did you learn?
All the victims said they were repeatedly sexually assaulted by Ariel Castro, either vaginally, orally, or anally. Once again, all the victims described a pattern of being repeatedly sexually, physically, emotionally assaulted by Ariel Castro during the entire time that they were held captive.
Right. You mentioned that you worked with prosecutors during the investigation and indictment of this case, correct?
That's correct.
You're aware now that your investigation resulted in some 977 counts being indicted against Mr. Castro?
That's correct.
And am I correct in saying that some of those counts reflect specific instances of conduct which were related to you, and other counts are more general, cover a general timeline?
That's correct.
Can you please describe that and how you arrived at that?
Yes, these charges reflect, some of them reflect specific instances of assault that were reported to me by the victims or through the investigation of various written materials.
So any specific count in the indictment reflects a count of sexual assault that was related to you by a victim or you found through your investigation?
That's correct.
Now, the more general counts, how were those arrived at?
When we could not determine a specific instance of physical and sexual assault, we determined that these assaults occurred more often than monthly during the period of activity based on the victim's statements. So we sought an indictment for one count of sexual assault per month per victim for the period of captivity. Through my investigation, I again learned that the abuse was continuous and without interruption during the time they were held captive.
All right, now you mentioned that you had reviewed written materials that were kept by the victims during their period of captivity. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Those might more generally be referred to as diaries or journals?
That's correct.
Thank you very much, Detective. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, I want an opportunity to ask a couple questions.
Your Honor, I would note that the plea contract stipulates that all of our evidence is stipulated to by the defense, not objection, and that they waive all hearsay. However, we have no objection to any inquiry.
The answer is yes. Thanks, Detective.
Hi, Detective. We've had many opportunities to talk about this case, and in fact, you saw me over the FBI reviewing evidence, the same sort of evidence that you reviewed, which would include the diaries and reviewing the hours of interviews of these young women. And so, one of the things that I want to point out is that despite the obvious nature of the sexual assaults and the kidnaps and the use of chains and restraints, a couple of things though that I want to understand and see if you concur with me, in that as it deals with Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the information that was provided during the course of multiple interviews with law enforcement, that it appears as if any pregnancy that she believed that she had may have simply just been first trimester pregnancies. Would you agree with that?
I would agree with that.
And further, any pregnancy that she may have had in first trimester, the question was asked of Amanda, who was in that house for 10 years, as to whether or not she saw and noticed that Michelle was pregnant. That question was asked of Amanda, correct?
Correct.
Judge.
Go ahead.
And ultimately, Amanda conveyed that she had no idea that Michelle was pregnant, didn't she?
That's correct.
And at some point during the discussions with Amanda about the relationship that she had with Mr. Castro, and when she believed that that she was pregnant with Jocelyn, she did inform law enforcement that despite the circumstances of being kidnapped, held hostage, and any sort of Stockholm syndrome that may have been in effect, she did use the words, I believe, that I heard them, that it was consensual. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. John, and inquire.
I don't think it's necessary. Here, the parties entered into a plea agreement, and as Mr. Weintraub has just demonstrated, they are fully aware of all the facts and the possibilities at trial, as was the state. And the state entered into a plea bargain understanding that they may or may not have been able to sustain all of their charges, and for new charges that might be brought, specifically capital charges. The defense is aware of all this information, and they thought it was more prudent on behalf of their client to enter into a plea bargain which avoided that. So each side had full knowledge, as I understand it, and entered into an agreement to resolve this matter and to recommend to the court a particular sentence. So,
We'll withdraw your question.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Your Honor, the state would next present Joshua Barr from the Ohio Attorney General's Office, Bureau of Criminal Investigation. He will be presented again by Mr. Mark.
morning, Mr. Barr. Are you from Richfield or Columbus? Richfield. Thanks.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Barr.
Good morning.
Will you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Yes, Joshua Barr, B-A-R-R.
How are you employed, sir?
I'm employed by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation, commonly referred to as BCI.
And what do you do for BCI?
I'm a forensic scientist assigned to the firearms section.
What sort of training do you have to get that kind of job?
I've got a Bachelor's of Science in Forensic Science from Eastern Kentucky University, as well as a year of on-the-job training at BCI and a year of prior experience at the Hamilton County Coroner's Office.
All right, so what sort of work do you do for BCI?
I do firearms operability testing. I do bullet and cartridge case comparisons to determine what particular source weapon they were fired from. Also do tool mark comparisons, GSR distance determinations.
Very good. Now, did you generate an operability report as a result of investigation in this case?
Yes, I did.
May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Yes.
Mr. Barr, I'd like to bring your attention to what's been previously marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 18. Can you just generally describe what this is?
Yes.
Well, it's a box, right?
Yeah.
What's in the box?
It's a box containing it's still attached to the okay. It's a box containing a Ruger Service 6 revolver.
What caliber?
It's .357 Magnum caliber.
And this was recovered from the home of Mr. Ariel Castro, correct?
Yes. And
what did you do to analyze this weapon?
I test fired the weapon to determine if it was operable.
How do you do that?
In a typical operability case, we take two cartridge cases and fire it in. With this type of gun, I would fire it once in single action, once in double action to determine that it was working properly.
Did you do that?
Yes, I did.
And what was your determination?
I determined that it was operable.
Meaning that it could expel an explosive?
Yeah, they could expel a projectile.
Now, I'd like to hand you what's been marked previously for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 16B. Do you recognize that report?
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's a copy of the report I issued in this case.
What are the findings?
That the gun was found to be operable.
Right. And that reflects what you've just said here, correct?
Yes.
All right. What else did you do during your investigation of this case?
I was asked to measure as well as weigh the chains that were recovered in the case.
Mr. Barr, you can talk about that, but we're not displaying them.
Very good. Thank you, Judge. What did you find, Mr. Barr?
I examined the chains and took a cumulative length measurement of all the chains combined, as well as a cumulative weight of all the chains.
What were your findings?
I determined that, first of all, I'd like to explain how I measured the chains. Some of the chains had several smaller chains attached to them by padlocks. I took a length measurement from longest point to longest point, so I didn't measure any of the attached chains. So from longest point to longest point of all the chains that I was asked to examine, they were a total of 99 feet 3 inches, and that's an approximate measurement.
And did you also weigh the chains?
Yes, the total weight of all the chains and padlocks combined was 92.28 pounds.
Now, you were not the only representative from BCI to work on this case, is that correct?
Yes.
Can you estimate how many people worked on this case from your organization?
I can't give an exact estimate. I mean, there was basically every section of the laboratory was involved. There was a huge amount of evidence.
What other sections do you have in your laboratory?
We've got latent prints, we've got forensic biology, DNA, trace evidence.
And there were hundreds of pieces of evidence in this case, is that correct?
That's correct.
It was also your organization that determined the paternity of the minor child that was found in the home, is that correct?
Yes, to my knowledge.
And to your knowledge, the paternity was established that Ariel Castro was the father of the minor child found in the home?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Your Honor, the state would next call upon Special Agent Andrew Burke of the Violent Crime Task Force of the Cleveland FBI office.
Morning, Mr. Burke.
Judge.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Would you identify yourself, please?
My name is Special Agent Andrew Burke.
Where are you employed?
With the FBI, assigned to the Cleveland Division.
What do you do there?
More specifically, I'm assigned to the Violent Crime Task Force. It's a multi-agency task force. It's comprised of detectives and investigators from the FBI, Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office, Cleveland Police Department, and the Ohio Adult Parole Authority, as well as the Cuyahoga Metro Housing Authority.
How long have you been with the FBI overall?
Approximately 7 years.
How long with the task force?
About the same amount of time.
Can you give us a brief overview, if you will, of the course of the history of this case, beginning in 2002, 2003, 2004, that brought us to May 6, 2013?
The FBI became involved with these investigations through the disappearance of Amanda Berry in 2003 and Gina DeJesus in 2004. In those specific instances, our assistance was requested by the Cleveland Police Department. We became very involved with those investigations from the beginning. There were a number of circumstances that resulted in our involvement, specifically the young age of the victims and the suspicious circumstances surrounding their disappearance. We worked closely with the Cleveland Police over the next decade or so of those investigations. Following leads, we conducted numerous searches. We interviewed witnesses, all the while maintaining essentially companion investigations, sharing information between our agency and theirs.
So, is it a fair statement that local law enforcement, in conjunction with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, maintained an ongoing missing persons investigation for Georgina and Amanda during all those years?
Very much so.
Now, we're generally aware that Michelle, her family, did not make a follow-up report or confirmation, so that although she was initially reported missing, there was not a demonstration of her absence. There was a question as to her disappearance in terms of law enforcement. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Now, take us to the events of May 6th, how you were notified of what was occurring on Seymour Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, and what you did in response.
I was notified by a task force officer, detective on our task.
I mean, Judge, can we have the courtroom screen turned on at this point, please? Thank you. Please continue.
I was notified by a task force officer that Cleveland police were reporting to him that Amanda Berry had been recovered from a house at 2207 Seymour, and I was being requested to respond to that address. I did so, and approximately 15 minutes later I arrived on the scene. I met with a 2nd District detective, John Graves. Detective Graves advised me that not only had Amanda been found in the house, but also Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus and a 6-year-old girl. And the ambulance was still on scene when I arrived. Quite honestly, I don't remember what else the detective was saying. I was focused on the ambulance at that point.
Do you have an image on the screen before you on the witness stand?
Yes.
And what do you recognize the red dot over the home to represent?
That's the location of 2207 Seymour.
Now, when you arrived on scene, let me just back up for a second. Were you generally visually familiar with the missing persons photos of Georgina and Amanda, for example?
Very much so.
Okay. Set the scene for us. What did you find when you arrived on Seymour in terms of what you saw and what you did?
The Cleveland police had started to secure the scene. They started with the house. They had a perimeter around the house, and they were in the final stages of marking a perimeter further up the street in both directions. There was a Cleveland EMS unit stationed in front of the house. Detective Graves took me to the back of the ambulance, and when they opened the door, inside the ambulance was immediately recognizable to me to be Gina DeJesus and Amanda Berry. I did not have a familiarity with Michelle Knight, but I also noticed her as well as Amanda Berry's daughter in the ambulance.
Does that moment stand out for you as an investigator?
I'll never forget it.
Did you have any conversation with them at that moment in time?
My conversation was very limited at that point.
Where did you turn your attention?
My attention turned to making sure that the scene's been secured, and then to the investigation that was to ensue.
As the agent on scene representing the Violent Crime Task Force, did you have resources at your disposal that you could activate?
I did.
Tell us about that.
We notified the task force that basically an all-call, everybody was needed, made the appropriate notifications through my chain of command, and we requested the assistance of our evidence response team, that would be the FBI's evidence response team, through our team leader, Special Agent Chris Garnett. We had a task force officer, John Morgan, who is a Cuyahoga County Sheriff's deputy, begin writing warrants for the premises of the home, vehicles, telephones, DNA, to be executed immediately. We also were coordinating with the Cleveland Police Department about the status of outstanding witnesses and the subject in this case, Ariel Castro. We began the process of coordinating also with the Cleveland Sex Crimes Unit, specifically Detective Hersimchuk, for initial victim interviews and the response of the families to the hospitals and the scene to be reunited.
What were the immediate needs of the victims as a group that they could not provide for themselves, even though they had gained their freedom?
Well, that evening, of course, there were some medical needs that had to be attended to. But in the short term that followed, there were a significant number of needs to return them to their loved ones in a safe manner. Things as simple as clothing and shoes. We had to provide them somewhere safe to stay. Initially, there was anticipated to be a large media reaction to their discovery in the home, their escape from it. So our attention was focused primarily on their safety and security at that point.
And how were those needs provided for?
We arranged for hotel rooms, 24-hour security. We arranged transportation to and from, shopping for food, clothing. Then in the immediate days that followed, 2-3 days afterwards, along with the Cleveland Police Department, arranged for their return to their homes or their loved ones.
Now we're going to return to the events of May 6th in a moment, but over the course of the passage of the days that followed, the weeks that followed, was your task force and the Federal Bureau of Investigation able to secure other needs such as medical attention on an ongoing basis other than the urgent care that they were providing that night at Metro?
There was a large community outpouring of support, and a lot of offers came in from various agencies and providers throughout the Cleveland and actually on the national scale as well. We were able to help them get connected to some world-class care here in Cleveland, and we facilitated visits with medical staff, psychological staff, through transportation and other needs.
Now, prior to joining the FBI, did you have a previous career?
I did.
What was it?
I was a paramedic.
Are you still certified?
Yes, I am.
Now, to the extent that that provides you with some medical training appropriate to a paramedic, I want to reference that in terms of what you saw in terms of the victims as a group, in terms of their physical condition, as they appeared to you when you first saw them.
Well, of course, I didn't have an opportunity, nor was it my role to examine them that evening. My observations were based on what I saw in the ambulance briefly. It was clear that they were pale. They appeared to be malnourished, possibly dehydrated. But those are really the only observations I'd be qualified to make.
Thank you. Based on your knowledge of the course of the investigation, have each of the victims been in need of ongoing medical care as a result of their captivity and abuse and victimization by Ariel Castro?
All of the victims in this case's needs are ongoing. I think that's, I don't know that anyone could expect anything different, really. They've made dramatic improvements from the time that I've spent with them. They are with people that love them. They are getting, like I mentioned, world-class medical, psychological care. But you can't turn off 10 years of systematic, sustained psychological, sexual, and physical abuse like a light switch. So I think it almost goes without saying in this case.
Well, let's return to the events of the week of May 6th. You mentioned Chris Garnett, your lead evidence technician from the agency, from the Bureau. Do you know approximately how many photos were taken of the interior of 2207 C1?
I would be estimating at this point that there are over 1,000 photographs, to include digital photographs from a digital SLR to sphere on camera, 360 photos. There were a lot of photos.
And you see before us the table with the model of 2207. How did that come to be in court today, to your knowledge?
That model was created by the FBI's Operational Project Unit, which is a unit at Quantico. They took measurements from the scene, from the house, using total station, which is basically a surveyor's measurement tool. And then they constructed this house as a scale model, 1 inch equaling 1 foot. basically to scale.
And the room colors that we see, at least in the visible portion today, are they an attempt to match the actual room colors, in part because of how the victims describe what room they were in by room color?
Yes.
Well, did you have an opportunity to go through the interior of 2207 Seymour?
Yeah, on multiple occasions, yes.
When was the first time?
I would say the first time was either the following day or maybe the day after their escape.
Describe that experience.
Well, it was surreal to me. I've been involved in the missing persons investigations for quite some time, and so it was a difficult experience. That's basically how I describe it.
Did you, for your own benefit, go through all levels of the home? Basement, first floor, second floor, attic?
Yes.
Can you cover what you saw there in terms of the mechanism of captivity, for lack of a better term? How Mr. Castro had turned this residence into a prison?
When I first went through the home, our evidence response team had collected a significant number of items, more than 300 items of evidence. So some of the physical restraints had been removed. Most of the physical restraints had been removed. But I was taken through the house by Special Agent Garnett, who pointed out specific locations where these restraints had been attached. There were a number of modifications to the interior of the home to fortify certain areas. Those were easily visible on inspection. There were divisions between spaces in the house that were, again, designed not only to make the house more secure for its occupants, but also to hide, I think, the existence of additional rooms in the house.
I'd like to turn your attention to the monitor before you. Do you recognize that view of a door that's before you?
That's the front door. It's an interior photograph. Obviously, you're looking at the inside of the front door.
I'm going to reference this as states 10H. And what are the items that are hanging on the door, to your knowledge?
Those are a series of alarm clocks, and they're wired in a makeshift manner to create essentially an alarm system to the house.
And the white wire that we see, do you know where that white wire traveled through the house?
Yes.
Where did it travel to?
It went from this front alarm contraption all the way to the back door.
And was there similar wiring at the back door?
Yeah, there was a contact switch at the back door that appeared that it would activate this alarm.
Can you give us a general description of other things that you found of interest or note on the first floor?
On the first floor, there was a kind of a heavy curtain, or maybe even like a bedspread that separated the kitchen from the rest of the living area. Unusual for the layout of this particular house was that what would be considered the dining room had been turned into a bedroom. So there was a large, probably queen-size mattress where the dining room would typically be.
Now, if you could turn your attention to the floor model here, and you see this article?
Yes.
Do you recognize what this is intended to represent?
It's intended to represent a porch swing.
Where was it located in the home?
That was essentially where it is in the model home at this point.
the base of the landing of the staircase leading to the second floor?
That's correct.
Did it act as an obstacle to go through the stairs?
Certainly.
Turning your attention to the monitor, what's shown currently?
This is a photograph of the only bathroom in the home. It's referenced as room D in the FBI evidence sketch. It's on the first floor attached to the kitchen.
Do you recognize this photo, which I'll reference as states 10J?
Yes.
What is it?
This is a view from the landing after the first set of steps as you go up from the first floor. There's a turn, and you go up another set of steps before you reach the second floor. So this is a landing between the first and second floors. At the top of the image is a brown curtain, and the curtain was concealing the landing to the second floor.
All right, so it's a little bit hard to see, but in terms of the model, that would be in the center of the second floor at the top of that staircase.
That's correct.
And was this also a heavy material?
Yes.
Next photo, please. This next shot, is that from the top of the staircase looking down?
Yes.
It's just another representation of that curtain hanging over the top of that staircase.
Yes, as Officer Johnson presented that she had to push away a curtain. This is the curtain she would have been referring to.
Next photo. States 10L. You recognize the view on the monitor?
I do.
Can you tell us what it is?
This is a view from the hallway in the second floor of the room that was labeled, I believe it's room I, and that is the room that the investigation showed Amanda Berry and her daughter spent the majority of their time.
So, turning to stage 20, this schematic layout of each floor of the home, we would be referencing this front bedroom on the second floor, is that correct? It's labeled I?
That's correct.
Could you describe the status or the condition or the unusual nature of the bedroom door itself?
Yes, the door had obviously been modified by the picture here. There's a handle on the outside that's screwed in. It functions to be able to pull the door closed, as there's no doorknob attached to either the inside or the outside. There is an eye bolt. It's hard to see here, but there's a slide lock, and then underneath it there's a small eye bolt that marries up with an eye bolt in the door jamb, so that one could secure the door from the outside with a lock. Then there's a hole cut in the bottom panel there, which was later determined to be a source of ventilation for the room.
Why was ventilation needed? Weren't there windows in that room?
There were windows, but they were boarded up from the inside.
And what were they boarded up with, if you know?
It appears that they're closet doors, very heavy, full-thickness wooden closet doors.
Now, turning to stage 10N, can you see a portion of those closet doors behind the fabric on the far wall there?
Yes.
Okay, those are the white panel doors, correct?
Correct.
This next photo, stage 10O, what is that?
That's an interior shot of that room, room I.
What are those items on the wall, if you know?
Those are workbook pages, child workbook pages.
Stage, next photo, please. 10P. Does this then show the closet doors nailed across the two windows in that room, room I?
It does.
Now, off of this room, there was a separate room that adjoined it, correct?
Correct.
Now, would you agree that the approximate dimensions of the first room were 11.5 by 11.5 feet?
Yes.
And that the second room was approximately 7 foot 2 inches by, again, 11.5 feet approximately?
Correct.
In the course of the investigation, what did you learn as to who occupied the first room that we saw as we entered through the door with the hole in it? Who occupied that room?
That would have been Amanda Berry and her daughter.
Okay, and then the smaller adjoining room was occupied by whom?
Michelle Knight and Gina DeJesus.
And we're currently looking at a photograph of the bedroom in the small adjoining room, which I'll reference as 10T. Who shared that bed?
That's in the room where Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight were.
Next slide. And there, the window in that small adjoining room, was there any obstruction as to that window?
Yes.
Can you describe it?
Underneath what's clearly shown on the photograph as a sheet, underneath that is a very thick wooden panel that was screwed in.
That's one. And currently, what's on the... Is there a commode there present in the room?
Yes.
And does that then show us the fabric pulled back to show the heavy board over the window?
Yes.
Next photo, please. Do you see the photo that's before you?
Yes.
I'll reference this to States 10W. What does it show?
That's a chain. It's in the room that Gina DeJesus and Michelle Knight shared.
Next photo. States 10X. What does this photo depict?
That is a hole through the wall. I believe that photo is on the side of Gina and Michelle's room. Through there is running a power cord that's plugged in the other room and the chain.
Now, for that small side room, the 7 by 11 room, with the window nailed shut, was there any attempt to provide for ventilation in that small space?
There was a small cutout in the ceiling and a box fan in the attic.
So the actual plaster was cut away, an opening made, and some electrical service to the attic was providing a fan.
Correct.
Next photo, please. Showing you States 10Y. Do you recognize what's shown there?
Yes.
What is it?
Chains, locks.
Do you know generally where those were found?
Those were found in the upstairs bedrooms.
Next photo. We are now on States 10Z. We're in the basement. What is of significance in this photo?
This is a view from the bottom of the stairs. The stairs are slightly visible at the far right margin of the photograph. And you're looking in a southerly direction through the house, basically the long axis of the house. On the left side of the frame is a support pole. That's a pole that we've come to understand that the women were restrained to at various points.
Next photo. Now, there's two things I'd like you to talk about in this photo. It's 10AA. The center pole and that rearmost washing machine. Why were they of significance?
Well, again, the pole is what the investigation has shown was used to restrain the women in the early stages of captivity. And the washing machine at the far end, a significant amount of cash was found sequestered in the washing machine.
Do you know how the team collecting the evidence had any indication to look for cash in the washing machine?
They were directed there by Ariel Castro.
Next photo, please. And You see that depiction of a written document found, I believe, near the kitchen counter sink. Are you familiar with that document that's roughly dated at 4/4/2004?
I am.
And what do you know that to be?
I know that to be a letter written by Ariel Castro.
I'm going to reference that as State's Exhibit 12. Now, does Mr. Castro talk about his conduct in that document?
He does.
Does he describe himself through his own choice of words as, I am a sexual predator?
Yes.
Does he describe his victimization of the women in this case?
To some degree, yes.
And seeing that slide that's before you right now, is that an enhancement of the actual page where it says, I am a sexual predator?
Yes.
Now, before you was a photograph of a full-face motorcycle helmet. How many motorcycles did you know Mr. Castro owned?
Multiple motorcycles.
Okay, but how many helmets?
There were also multiple helmets.
Fair to say many more helmets than there were motorcycles at the time of the investigation of this scene?
Fair to say, yes.
This item here, this light brown wig, does that bear significance to the investigation?
Yes.
In what manner?
The investigation showed that on the limited number of times that some of the survivors were allowed outside, they were instructed to wear a wig or a wig and multiple other elements of disguise.
Now, moving away from the photographs for a moment, we talked about some cash that was found in the house. Did Mr. Castro use his assets in terms of his cash monies that he had on hand to run an internal barter economy, if you will, with his victims?
On occasion.
And would he, after sexually abusing them, throw money at them, saying, here, you're being paid for the sex, in essence?
There were reports of that.
And would he then, in turn, if they wanted something special from the store, demand payment of them from those monies for him to go out and get items they were requesting?
Occasionally as well, yes.
Now, before you is who? Or whom, I should say.
Michelle Knight, Amanda Berry, and Gina DeJesus.
And this is the now well-known commercial production of their thank you statement. It's a still shot from that video, correct?
Yes.
Is that how they appeared to you that day, or those initial days?
No.
What was different?
As I mentioned, the women have made dramatic recoveries, I believe, in physically and psychologically. So their initial appearance to me was considerably more dire.
The middle photo of Michelle Knight that's on the screen before you now, do you recognize the place and location of that photo?
It's a photograph taken at Metro Hospital.
So that's how she appeared the night of May 6th?
Correct.
Thank you. And this photo would be from what point in time?
This would be the day or the day after, at that point, May 7th or possibly May 8th.
Now, this triplicate progression of Amanda Berry, do you recognize these photos?
Yes.
And the middle photo, do you recognize the place and location of that photo?
Metro Hospital.
And this photo?
That's at the FBI office, and that's May 7th.
And now this triplicate progression of Georgina DeJesus, do you recognize the Time and place of the middle photo.
May 6th, Metro Hospital.
And this photo.
May 7th, Cleveland FBI office.
Thank you, Special Agent Burke.
Judge, may I just real quickly?
Certainly.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, be mindful of the time, please.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Judge, this isn't going to count against our time.
You have till 11:30. Go ahead.
Thank you. Agent Burke, you were directed by Mr. Thomas to a letter that was found, which was allegedly written by Mr. Castro on April 4th of 2004. Do you recall that?
I do.
And you're familiar with that document. You've read it, I'm sure, several times. Is that correct?
I have read it several times, yes.
And you would agree with me then, based on your familiarity with the document, that despite the circumstances and the origin of this, he did explain in that letter to whoever was eventually going to read it as to how these abductions occurred, and he did express remorse for his conduct. Is that correct?
I believe in the letter he wrote something to the effect that he was sorry for his conduct.
And I think that you hopefully you agree with me too that part of this was he was unsure, but certainly believed that he expressed in his letter that he was sick and mentally ill. And other than that, he had no explanation for why he could possibly do something like this. Would you agree that he wrote that?
Yes.
In essence, I mean, we know that it does seem to imply, if you would agree with me, that this may have, in essence, for lack of a better word, in a suicide letter, there was that sort of an impression, and we know that ultimately he didn't kill himself, but he did give that impression that this was a suicidal type of note. Would you agree with that?
I don't know that I would concur that it was written as a suicide note. It did not give me that immediate impression.
Thank you. I don't have anything further.
Thank you.
Statement next call, Deputy David Jacobs.
How many deputies for work, Judge?
Good morning. Would you identify yourself and your employment?
My name is Dave Jacobs. I'm a deputy sheriff with the Cuyahoga County Sheriff's Office. As a detective, I'm currently assigned to the Violent Crimes Task Force at the Cleveland FBI.
And are you deputized as to any other law enforcement agencies?
Yes, I have a Special Deputy U.S. Marshal commission, and I'm also commissioned by the Special Agent in Charge of the Cleveland Division by the FBI.
In the interest of time, were you involved or assigned to participate in the interrogation of Ariel Castro May 7, 2013?
Yes.
Did you develop a strategy for that interrogation as to how you intended to proceed?
I did.
What was it?
My strategy for the interrogation was to be non-confrontational, to obtain information from Mr. Castro that would meet the elements of the crimes that we thought that he may be charged with in the near future.
Were you going into it in an attempt to browbeat him or be confrontational with him?
Not at all.
Okay. Did you administer Miranda rights to him?
Yes, I did.
Did he read a written form and sign a written waiver of Miranda rights?
Yes, he did.
On a separate form, and then ultimately later at the end of the conclusion of that process, did he also execute a 3-page summary statement of the course of that interrogation as to his core admissions of conduct?
Yes, he did. That was the, there were 2 interviews that I conducted with Ariel Castro. The first one was May 7th. The second one was May 8th. The second day is when we took a written statement from Mr. Castro.
Briefly, I just want to approach, Your Honor, and show him states 11,
Do you recognize this document? 3 pages?
Yes, I do. That's the written statement we took from Ariel Castro on May 8, 2013.
Would you describe how Mr. Castro interacted with you in terms of, if you posed a question or a statement to him, was he in engagement with you during this interrogation? Was he responsive to your questions?
Yes, surprisingly, his answers were very succinct. When I asked him a question, he answered the question. Typically, in my experience in interviews, when you ask somebody an incriminating question, you may not get the answer. I felt that Ariel Castro, when the questions were posed to him, incriminating questions, he answered those questions.
So was he beating around the bush?
Not at all.
Was he taking you the long way around the block?
Absolutely not.
Now, have you prepared some notes that are a condensation of the high points of the course of this interrogation?
I have.
Would you take us through it in a narrative fashion, please?
Okay. There were certain things that stood out throughout the interviews both days, May 7th and May 8th, that Ariel Castro had talked about. The way the interview was formatted was, I thought that we should start with Michelle Knight. She was the first person that was abducted in this case. We then went to Amanda Berry, and then we went to Gina DeJesus. As it was formatted, we felt that it would be a lot easier to control the interview and gain the facts if we specifically talked about the incidents surrounding Michelle, Amanda, and Gina separately. Ultimately, we did that. Mr. Castro admitted throughout the interview to us on each occasion how he took the girls. He indicated that he had extensive conversations with the girls surrounding the times that he did abduct them. In his own words, he used the word abduct. He referenced himself in the interview as a sexual predator. I asked him at that point, what do you consider what a sexual predator is? And he said somebody that continually repeats offenses. I asked him if it was a one-time incident, how would he reference himself? He referred to that as a sexual offender.
Did he use the phrase, "I'm the criminal"?
Yes, he did. And that was, to put that in context, I also conducted interviews with his mother, Lillian, and I also conducted interviews with his brother, O'Neill. And to put that statement in context, it was in reference to his brother's lack of involvement in this entire situation.
From the totality of the investigation, is there any reason to believe that his brothers had any knowledge of what he was up to?
In my opinion, no.
Okay. And that's supported by the descriptions from the victims that it was Mr. Ariel Castro and Mr. Ariel Castro alone that conducted this scheme against them?
Yes.
Now, why did he do what he did? Did he tell you why he was abducting young women off the streets of Cleveland?
He did. We initially talked about how he did it, which I explained a little bit earlier. And then we got into why he did it. And his response was to purely satisfy his sexual needs. The circumstances surrounding him taking the girls was explicit to us that it was to satisfy his sexual needs.
Did he tell you whether or not he knew what he was doing in these acts was wrong?
Absolutely. During the interview, he said, other than the fact that I'm the criminal, I knew what I did was wrong. He said that more than once.
Did he explain why he had a gun in his possession?
He did. We talked about the gun for a short period of time. My recollection is correct, he got the gun from his father, who had passed away, and it was part of his collection or in his possession. He actually, in his own words, he said, I showed the gun to the girls as a form of control.
And are you aware that he used the gun as a form of control to play Russian roulette with his victim?
I did learn that, and that came through the victim's statements. The second day that I interviewed him, I had asked him if this incident actually took place. His response was that he didn't recall, but if the girls said it, then it probably happened.
All right. And then he played a trust game. He handed an empty revolver to a young woman and said, "Here, put it to my head, pull the trigger. If it's God's will that I die, I die. I'll say my prayers." Did he play that game?
Yes, he did.
And what was the purpose of that game in the context that's described by the victims?
I'm not completely familiar on the context of that interview.
Well, was it part of his gamesmanship of seeing who he could trust and how far?
I believe so, yes.
Now, did you reach a compelling point in this interview where he said something that he admitted he did, in essence, in cold blood?
Yes, he did. In his own words, the first day that I had interviewed him, which was May 7th, we were talking about Gina's abduction. And that day, his story was that he had gone to Wilbur Wright to see his daughter, Arlene, also known as Rosie. A short time later, he observed Rosie walking with Gina. They were together. By the time he had turned around on Lorraine Road, they were separate. His daughter was walking on the south side of Lorraine, westbound, and Gina was continuing to walk eastbound on the south side of Lorraine. He said, "I did a cold-blooded thing to my daughter that day." He said that I drove past my daughter to get to Gina.
Did he ever offer any remorse about his conduct?
He did not. He was given the opportunity the second day that we interviewed him, prior to me taking the written statement. I explained to him that I wanted this statement to be in his words, and if there was something that he wanted put in the statement to include an apology, I would accommodate that. He did not take that opportunity, and one of the last things I did say to him on May 8th after taking the statement was, "Is there anything that you could say or do to the family that would make things better?" There was no response.
And you see Mr. Castro in court here today.
Yes.
And would you point to him and describe what he's wearing?
He's sitting at the table wearing an orange jumpsuit.
Would the record reflect the identification of Mr. Ariel Castro, please?
It will, but
I understand.
It seems unnecessary at this point.
Showing you state 17, do you recognize what this CDR represents as a copy of the interrogation?
It represents it. There was a video and audio taken of both times that Mr. Castro was interrogated.
Thank you. One other question.
Just one question with your permission, Judge.
Yes.
These interviews, sir, that were taken before he had the advice and counsel of lawyers, right?
Yes, they were.
He just came, you went to see him, and he completely cooperated with you, didn't he?
To use the word completely, I don't think that's accurate. I believe that if I can describe it, he did cooperate. I felt that some of the elements of the crime were minimized, but he was very cooperative throughout the interview.
Talked himself right into convictions, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
And he wasn't hesitant at all to tell you exactly what happened from his perspective, right?
No, he wasn't.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Your Honor, the state would next present Dr. Gregory Saathoff, S-A-A-T-H-O-F-F.
Morning, Doctor.
Morning.
Good morning, Doctor. We're going to be moving fast. Do you possess a medical license?
Yes, I do.
From where?
State of Virginia.
And what specialty?
Psychiatry.
And do you pursue a profession?
Yes, I'm a psychiatrist.
And you practice forensic psychiatry?
Correct.
For whom?
I'm at the University of Virginia in Charlotte.
Do you consult with the federal government, for example, the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit?
Yes, I serve as the conflict resolution specialist for the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group.
And what is that?
It is the group that contains the negotiators, the profilers, the hostage rescue team within the FBI. It's the operational division within the FBI that responds to crisis as well as violent crimes. National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime is located within the Critical Incident Response Group.
Right. And do you then interact also with other federal agencies such as Homeland Security and other committees that may be called by entities of the federal government such as courts or agencies?
Correct.
In the course of your professional career, have you had the occasion to interview a large number of serious offenders in terms of developing behavioral profiles for the benefit of educating law enforcement?
Yes, I have.
And have you previously had past exposure to cases of captivity, serial kidnapping, sexual abuse in the course of captivity?
Yes, I have.
Now, were you asked by our office to consult with us and review case materials both in our possession and in the possession of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in connection with the state of Ohio versus Ariel Castro?
Yes.
And what briefly did you review?
I reviewed videotapes. I reviewed transcripts of videos that were done of 3 women, as well as a approximately 10-hour video of an FBI interview that was done of Mr. Castro. Other related court documents. I also had the opportunity to interview a former girlfriend of Mr. Castro.
Okay. Was that Lillian Roldan?
Yes.
Now, did you prepare a report of opinion to our office in connection with that work that you did?
Yesterday I wrote a letter that summarized my findings.
And is that States 24?
Yes, it is.
All right. I'd like you to take us through that report by topic. As to the first topic that's mentioned in your report, the scope and magnitude of Ariel Castro's crime is unprecedented. Whose choice of words is that?
It's my choice of words.
And why is it that you make that statement?
I had the opportunity to speak with senior representatives from the Behavioral Analysis Unit, Crimes Against Adults at the FBI, and spoke with them about this case. They had actually toured the house and were very well aware of the case, and spoke with them about their own experience, and they confirmed my experience that this is unprecedented in terms of the number of unrelated victims, the length of captivity, and the location, as well as the fact that in most cases of abduction, these are impulsive in nature, and the victim is kept only for a matter of minutes or hours. In this case, rather than a short abduction is a tactic. In fact, there appeared to be a strategy here that extended over a period of many years. And this is quite unusual and in fact unprecedented, according to the FBI's National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime.
So is there anybody else in the FBI or your personal professional experience that matches the course of conduct displayed by Mr. Castro in these sets of offenses?
No.
So he's in a class of one by himself?
Well, certainly there are cases where there have been longer-term abductions and the like, but the specific nature of this, to abduct and to keep this number of unrelated victims for this length of time within a neighborhood setting is completely unprecedented.
Right. Turning to the next topic within your report, point number 2, Castro functioned as a environmental manipulation represented a calculated captivity. Would you explain that statement?
Yes. Mr. Castro used, although he had stated in his FBI interview that his selection of the victims was impulsive in nature. In fact, there was a pattern of behavior. It was always on the same street. These victims were similar in terms of their stature, their age. They were female, and they also were very trusting. And his use of ruses in order to get them into his vehicle and actually to get them into his house. Once there, over the years, he exposed them to significant degradation and violence, which has already been described. He enforced control over the most intimate and private functions of their lives, which included food, bathing, and toileting. So it was really a very complete and comprehensive captivity.
Now, your next topic is, throughout the period of captivity, Ariel Castro engaged in constant duplicity of family, neighbors, friends, and co-workers in order to maintain maintained his control over the situation. Why was that significant to you as a forensic psychiatrist?
This is really the most significant part of the case, I think, that someone would be able to, month after month, year after year, be able to devise ways to conceal the situation from family, friends, neighbors. For a time, he maintained a relationship with a girlfriend who was completely unaware that he had these women in the house. His use of wigs, which has already been described, his playing of music loudly in the house. He was a musician, but the playing of music sometimes to mask any potential for the women to be heard over the music were examples. I think the use of aliases, making sure that his daughter learned the names of these women, not their real names, but used aliases, all contrived to conceal this protracted captivity.
Now, did he, in your review of materials, make any claim to anyone professionally that he needed mental health treatment or mental health treatment?
No.
And in fact, he's not diagnosed by the court clinic with having any mental health condition, correct?
His competency assessment was done by one of the most respected forensic psychiatrists in the country, Dr. Philip Resnick, who found no psychiatric illness whatsoever.
Thank you. Now, in this point number 3, you make mention of a quote by Mr. Castro that you found significant.
Yes.
And what was it?
I have quotes actually in that section. One was a statement in this document of 4 April 2004 in which he stated, quote, "I live a private life. I function around others like a normal person." And in fact, he appeared to have done that and was able to live this life around family and friends without them suspecting. With regard to the duplicity, in the document and my discussions with colleagues at the National Center for Analysis of Violent Crime, they were struck with the fact that in the document he made the statement, "I had no idea Gina was so young. She looks a lot older." But we certainly know that he was aware that Gina was a classmate of his daughter's. He knew his daughter's age. And therefore, to make that statement, "I had no idea Gina was so young, she looks a lot older," will cause some skepticism, I think, in the minds of those who were reviewing the document as to whether or not he was actually being truthful in writing the document and making the statements that he made.
Based on the entire totality of the information that you've been provided, do you have any professional reason to believe that if ever given his freedom again, Mr. Castro would not go back to his old ways?
No.
Why do you say that?
Well, the duplicity was so complete in terms of his ability to fool his family, his friends, even his girlfriend, who he maintained a relationship with at the time. The fact that he was able to construct this kind of situation day in, day out, as he said in his own statement, living a normal life, I think is quite significant. He appeared to certainly have a lot of emotion and attachment to his home, but whether or not there's true remorse with regard to the victims, I think that's a great question.
Thank you. And we would next call Dr. Frank Ockford.
Okay. A couple questions, Judge, with your permission. I know there is a time constraint, but it's kind of important. Doctor, you understand that Mr. Castro was tested for competency only. He wasn't tested for a psychiatric disorder, don't you?
Yes.
Okay, and that was what the doctor we gave such respect to, Dr. Resnick. He examined him for one purpose and one person only, not sanity at the time of the act, because that wasn't the referral by the court. It was for competency, correct?
Yes, he rendered...
Competency is different, doctor, than sanity at the time of the act, is it not? Just tell me yes or no.
Correct.
Okay, and what you put in your report, based upon the materials I reviewed, but you don't outline for us, what materials did you actually review?
I reviewed, as I mentioned at the beginning of my testimony, the transcripts of the recordings. I reviewed the competency document. I reviewed court documents related to the apprehension, charge documents. I was asked to, I wrote this letter yesterday. This was not a formal exam, obviously, and I didn't have the opportunity to examine Mr. Castro.
Right, you never examined Mr. Castro, nor did you ever speak to the girls or the ladies.
Correct.
Okay, and just real quickly, did you review the recent FBI statement or the interrogation that Mr. Castro underwent?
Yes.
All right, the recent one with the FBI, not with the gentleman, Mr. Jacobs, that was just here.
Correct.
Okay. And did you review the letter that Mr. Castro allegedly wrote?
On 4 April 04?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and he certainly talked about that he believes he suffers from mental illness, right?
That's what the letter states.
Right, well, Mr. Thomas just asked you about, did he ever say he needed help? He talked about mental illness back in 04 in a letter he wrote, didn't he?
He wrote, "I am a sexual predator who needs help, but I don't bother to get it."
Okay, and he talked about being sexually abused himself when he was a child, right?
Yes.
And he talked about an addiction to masturbation and pornography and things like that, didn't he?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Does any of that excuse his conduct in this case?
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you.
Final witness, Dr. Ock.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning, Dr. Ockberg. Could you please state your full name, spell your last name for the court?
Frank Ockberg, O-C-H-B-E-R-G.
And Dr. Ockberg, if you'd be so kind, could you just briefly tell us your education? Are you a licensed physician, and what do you do?
I was an undergraduate at Harvard, went to Johns Hopkins Medical School. I did my psychiatric residency at Stanford. I'm licensed in the state of Michigan. I'm a medical doctor, a psychiatrist. I'm the former mental health director of the state of Michigan and the former associate director of the National Institute of Mental Health. And I have been a consultant to the FBI, the Secret Service, and the National Security Council on issues that deal with victimization, law enforcement stress, terrorism, the intersection between mental health and criminal justice.
And Doctor, have you also been refining your practice to complex post-traumatic stress disorder as well as Stockholm syndrome?
Yes, I'm part of the team that defined the diagnosis post-traumatic stress disorder. I am credited not with naming Stockholm syndrome, but with defining it for hostage negotiators. And I have an extensive experience in working with people who have been seriously traumatized.
Doctor, did you become involved in the case of the state versus Ariel Castro, and were you requested your services by the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office?
Yes.
And as part of that, did you have an opportunity to review some documentation prior to making and issuing an opinion for the county prosecutor, Mr. Agente?
Yes.
What documentation, what evidence did you observe, did you review that you used in your opinion in this case?
I reviewed video examinations of the victims. I reviewed an extensive FBI database that included the writings of the victims and photographs and films that were taken during the period of captivity. I interviewed people who interviewed the victims. I did not interview them directly out of respect for their privacy and the wishes of their attorneys and guardians. I reviewed the examination of Mr. Castro. I reviewed his examination. I met with his daughter and had a face-to-face interview with her. I did what I felt was necessary and sufficient to develop a sense of what these survivors went through and what they face in the future.
And doctor, did you provide a letter to Mr. McGinty with regards to your findings with regards to this case?
Yes, I did.
And let's start with number one. What were your findings? How were these women hurt?
Well, Your Honor, these women were hurt in many ways, and I boiled it down to three. First is repeated episodes that were terrifying and that were the kind of trauma that we meant when we defined the post-traumatic stress disorder, the kind of trauma that you don't escape for years and sometimes a lifetime afterward. Images, smells, touches that come back to you when you're asleep, when you're awake, when you're in that twilight zone between sleep and wake from this. And sometimes you feel you're going crazy because your mind isn't working the way it should. This is not normal memory. This is the brain in a different type of circuitry. So it is medical, it is physical, it isn't simply an extreme of anxiety. They had that. That was a terror-induced state of mind. They had an entirely different dimension that I would call degradation, defilement, dehumanization. Not quite the same as being placed in high arousal shock, but being treated like an animal, being systematically and relentlessly deprived of your sense of self, your sense of dignity, your connection to others. And that has to do with not having access to sanitary facilities, the way you're fed, the way you're chained, all of that, for a long, long time. And then, finally, they were deprived. They were deprived of mother, of family, of home, of school, of 10 years in which you make your transition from being a young woman to being a woman. And that kind of deprivation isn't the same as being shocked and degraded. And part of what that does is it plays with your ability to know who to trust. This is the stage in which the human being is developing the capacity for real intimacy. This was not real intimacy. This was a perversion of intimacy.
And doctor, did he do additional damage through some of his actions against his victims?
Well, of course, and he deliberately aborted. Whether he believed it in his own mind or whether he feigned believing it, he tried to produce the belief that his daughter was a love child, not the product of forced sex in captivity. And when that happens, there is something that goes on in our minds. And for a period of time, we lack a real appreciation of what is real and what isn't. We become bonded to the person who aggresses against us. And that's the Stockholm Syndrome. I could explain it very quickly.
Go ahead.
Now, when you are suddenly captured, and in a moment you realize, I am in the presence of someone who can kill me and who makes me feel as though I will be killed. You're made like an infant. And then when you're treated so that you can't eat, you can't sleep, you can't use a toilet, you can't move without explicit permission, you are, the word would be infantilized. But then, little by little, you're given what it takes to survive. And in your mind, not consciously, unconsciously, you deny that this is the person who did all of this to me, and you start to feel the way you did as a little baby with your mother, who is the first source of nourishment, of life itself. So the body assigns to that person the feelings that you would have to your own biological mother. That's the Stockholm Syndrome. It's very deep. It's not something that you're doing very consciously. And I've interviewed scores and scores of people who've had the Stockholm Syndrome in different circumstances. And they're like these victims.
And doctor, how did these women cope? What were you able to determine by their interviews, by the information that was provided to you, that they were able to cope for 13,226 days before their escape?
First of all, among them are marvelous, compelling examples of resilience, of imagination, of humanity. I would start with Michelle. What an extraordinary human being. She served as doctor, nurse, pediatrician, midwife. She did the delivery. She had a child herself. And she did it under primitive circumstances. And when that little baby wasn't breathing, she breathed into that baby. She brought life to that child. And she also had circumstances in which she interposed herself so that Gina wouldn't get the assault. And she took it. She's a very courageous and heroic individual. And Amanda managed to raise a child under these circumstances and to teach that child values and faith and schooling. And there were times when there was interaction among them. And by and large, that interaction showed the milk of human kindness, love, faith, optimism. So they coped. Part of it was Stockholm Syndrome, but part of it are the gifts of personality and character that they had.
And doctor, what is their future?
Well, I've said very good things about them, and as a doctor who treats, I want to be on the side of optimism and encouragement and hope for them. But the damage that was done does not go away. They have life sentences. This was not trivial. I think they will, with the love and the support of this whole community and what they bring to the table, they have a good chance to have a good life. But that doesn't mean that they will ever be free of the damage that was done.
And would you agree with me, doctor, that their injuries that were permanent?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, thank you. All right, we will be in recess for 10 minutes. We'll see you all at 11:50.
You're looking at the sentencing hearing of Ariel Castro. It has been going on now for more than 2 hours, perhaps 2 hours and 30 minutes, something like that. We've heard a lot of testimony coming from the courtroom of Judge Michael Russo, Castro being led away. As we take a recess, we have heard from just a number of witnesses, beginning with Barbara Johnson, who was the one of the first officers, Cleveland police officers on the scene, and she described what happened there. We heard from Dr. Gerald Maloney, emergency room physician, Detective Andrew Harashimachuk of the Cleveland Police Sex Crimes Unit, and we've heard from several other people, concluding with a psychiatrist who simply just painted a picture of what these women were going through. Dr. Frank Oxberg is that psychiatrist, painted a picture of what they're going through and what they perhaps may face as we are talking about what happens now for Ariel Castro. Judge Michael Russo will certainly make a determination in the sentencing. This is the formal sentencing. It has been said earlier that, of course, Castro, through the plea agreement that came several days ago, will get a life imprisonment plus 1,000 years. Well, that was said informally. This is what's going to happen formally. This is where they are crossing each T and dotting each I over his case. So there's just been a great deal of testimony that has taken place for, well, more than 2.5 hours now. It is 11:41 in the afternoon. We started at around 9:15 this morning. With me is an attorney who is going to give us some light on this, Ron Fry. a criminal defense attorney and a professor of criminal law and proceedings at Ursuline College. Thank you so much for being with us. You and I have sat through this for the last 2.5 hours. Your thoughts on what you've heard and seen?
Right. The prosecution is doing a very good job making the record. As you indicated, what was previously done at the change of plea, there's an agreement as to an agreed-upon recommended sentence. The court still has to accept that agreed-upon recommendation. Everybody anticipates that the judge will, but the prosecution wants to make the record in order to ensure that that sentence is imposed and is not disturbed on appeal.
And it will not be disturbed on appeal. By what does that you mean? There will be no chance of an appeal, even no inkling of an appeal. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. During the plea, or I'm sorry, within the plea agreement, he expressly waived his rights to appeal in this case, and that was even mentioned here today. Now, it's certainly possible that an attorney could look at this following this hearing and still look for some method of appeal if there is any error. So the judge wants to make